housekeeping notes before we do start. First, this is part of the H-ISAC Navigator program, and as a result, MedSec, who Kevin and I both work with, are sponsoring this. But this is not purpose of selling or talking about vendor solutions or anything like that. It would be premature of that just because of where the state of SBOMs are. And so we respect your privacy. You will get one follow-up LinkedIn message or email from us. We'll offer you the opportunity to opt in to MedSec's briefings, and those are primarily used, almost exclusively used for presenting sessions like this. We're not going to spam you. We're not going to put you on a sales list or anything like that unless you tell us you want us to. So that's the purpose here. Our objective as MedSec, it's a mass of people who are very passionate about medical device security. And fundamental to our purpose and our cause is to do things like this session, which is to raise all of the ships in the harbor. And so we want to protect your privacy. And I will give you one tip here as being a part of a Zoom conference. If you're going to do a Q&A or a chat, you may want to just change your screen name, because I have had incidents where we're doing a session like this, we're respecting your privacy, but other people are scraping the names off of the screen. And a few weeks ago, we actually had a vendor actually contacting people during the web session, and that was more embarrassing for them than us. But just a cautionary tale, it's always great if you are on a webinar to change your screen name and then change it back when you're done. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see two buttons. One is chat. We're leaving that open for you to say hi, and we won't be actively monitoring that. If you do have a question, click on the Q&A button and you'll be able to use that to direct questions. We do have Brad Rajetsky on the line with H-ISAC, and he'll be attending to your questions, and we'll bring him live in order for him to provide those questions to the panelist. So without further ado, oh, and by the way, we'll also be providing answers to any of the questions that we don't get to answer here. And hopefully we'll have some really engaging questions. And if we don't get to all of them, we'll pass that out with the recorded video. So Ken Hoyme, if you'd be so kind to introduce yourself, we'll just go through and introduce the panelists, and then get on with some really great questions we queued up.
Sure. Thanks, Caston. Yeah, I'm Ken from Boston Scientific. I am a senior fellow in product cybersecurity. Have been working in the space of safety, security, integration, medical devices for getting close to 20 years now.
Kevin McDonald.
I'm Kevin McDonald. I work with MedSec as a cybersecurity advisor. I've been in healthcare for 40 plus years, started out on the clinical side doing nursing, critical care nursing, was a director of the critical care at a hospital out in Washington State. Jumped over to EMRs, jumped over to IT, and made another jump over to cybersecurity. Spent the last 20 years at Mayo. And during that time, I helped them set up their medical device cybersecurity program. So I'm working with MedSec, semi-retired, which according to my wife makes me semi-reasonable to live with now.
and one more thing, you were the only male in your graduate class in nursing school. So congratulations for leading that and all the contributions that you're making. Jennings Ask.
Hi, so I'm Jennings Oski. I'm the Senior Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer for New York Presbyterian Hospital. I'm a licensed attorney. I've worked in healthcare, privacy, and security since 2005. And basically, the topic of medical device security and software bill of materials is a real passion for me. So I'm glad to be here today.
Fantastic. And so, Jennings, if you could, would you give us an idea of what an SBOM is so that we can level the baseline, and then where we stand as an industry with SBOMs?
Sure. So a software bill of materials, or SBOM, is basically a list of components in a piece of software. And you should think of it sort of like the ingredients list on the back of a box of cookies you bought, right? So the whole idea is that the creation and utilization of SBOMs can help with certain use cases for both the manufacturer of software as well as the consumer of software. You know, for the best example I can think of is, I'll tell this from a personal perspective. I was working briefly outside of healthcare at a software manufacturer when Heartbleed hit. And pretty much immediately, customers started calling us and asking, are you effective? Do you use OpenSSL in your software? And we really struggled initially to answer that because we did not have that list of components in our software. And I want to stress that most of the software that we all consume as individuals or at our workplaces is built from components of other software. So for me, that event with Heartbleed really struck home, and it highlighted to me the need for the development of software bills of material, and not just in healthcare for medical devices, but across all industries. And the manufacturer in that case, really would have had the ability to be more responsive and fix things. And then from the consumer perspective, if you have an SBOM, you can use it for different use cases like procurement, identifying, a vendor or a supplier that makes and takes care of their software and has up-to-date components. You can use it for risk management, vulnerability management, operations. So SBOMs are things that, have a lot of benefit to organizations, and there's real momentum for the use of SBOMs across industry sectors.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you for the introduction, Jennings. So Ken, and we had a great comment from Dick saying, glad to see cross-sector info sharing is happening. And that really goes to the key of what H-ISAC is trying to achieve. And Jennings, some of the things we'll talk about is really bridging the producers and the consumers of medical devices, being the medical device manufacturers and healthcare providers. So from the manufacturer side, Ken, could you give us a perspective about, some of the issues around the delivery of SBOMs and how that gets to your customers and how we go about consuming that? What's the state of the industry from the manufacturer's perspective?
Well, and it's typical because there's such a variety of manufacturers of different sizes. There's probably a greater advancement on the process to do this in the larger manufacturers that have the resources to deploy it. I think we've been actively engaged in the NTIA process, and using the outputs of theirs to try to drive how we produce SBOMs. We in the last year incorporated SBOM requirements into our quality system, so that essentially to execute the process of a software-driven device that would get produced. And then we've also been doing a remediation for devices that are already out in the field, how we would want to generate it. I think some of the challenges that are there in terms of creation of it is, do you use a software content analysis tool to identify by feeding it in what the tool says you have in it, or do you instrument your build process so that as you build the software, you can log things that are being imported into the build. Another challenge that's in there is that a build process usually is to the medical device application that you're building, but not necessarily then incorporates all the things that are in the underlying operating system. So sometimes you have to use one kind of analysis tool to capture operating system data and a separate one for the libraries and things that are brought into it. So it's a complicated problem. I think the industry is making progress. Certainly the proof of concept work that the NTIA has done and Jennings has been involved in is helpful to get those lessons learned out. And I know we'll continue to adapt our processes as we move forward. But our goal is by the middle of this year to have SBOMs available for all of our products.
Now you're talking on behalf of Boston Scientific.
Yep.
What would you, what's your perspective on the state of the industry? Obviously, because your involvement, you're ahead
again,
of the curve.
I think the big players have been participating and understand this requirement, recognize that the illusions, which was originally to SBOM, and we understand will be backed off to SBOM in the upcoming second draft of the pre-market guidance. It's going to become a regulatory expectation to deliver. So I think those companies that see that coming first are building and using the NTIA guidelines. Again, I think we're going to learn a lot about detailed electronic formats, nomenclature, or what you use to name software as we work through it. But this is a crawl, walk, run process that at least those with resources seem to be actively involved.
Yep. Yep. And you did mention the proof of concept that Jennings has been very intimately involved, as has Michelle Jump, who heads that NTIA committee. So are you starting to see more interest, more involvement and request from the healthcare providers?
Yes, certainly. Those are showing up in some of the contract language. Certainly the new MDS2 form is, and that has space in it to reference an SBOM. So yeah, certainly we're seeing those in some of the more forward-looking, aggressive,
Sure.
Comprehensive
Sure.
Contract language that we see.
Great. And then we'll be talking about bridging through the POC with Jennings in kind of an open forum near the end of this, really with the call to action to get involved and move forward with SBOMs by contributing all of the knowledge, both from the manufacturers and the healthcare providers. So that's a great introduction to the manufacturer's perspective, Ken. Thank you for that. Kevin, what are the challenges that really aren't solved by SBOMs, and how do we address those deficiencies in the structure as we understand it today?
This is a great question. I actually saw a comment from Eric Decker about, okay, essentially he's asking, so I got the SBOM, what the hell do I know now? And one of the things that people have to realize with the SBOMs is that, well, let me take a step back. While Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for those of you who know it, really has been disproven, but it's a good model. SBOMs aren't at the top of self-actualization. They're somewhere in the middle. So you still, before really to make your SBOM worthwhile, you still need to do all of that same stuff. We got to have an inventory. We got to be able to somehow have a list of all of our devices and context and attributes about them. So unless you have that, an SBOM really, you'll be wandering around the hallways of the hospital looking for a device that has this software in it. So you really need those basic cybersecurity things in place. You got to have a risk management program to use it. You got to have some repository to put it in. So that whole infrastructure and ecosystem right now in most facilities, and quite frankly at in between HDOs and vendors, is lacking as well. Sooner or later, we'll get to the place of where either there's a clearinghouse that just sends it out, you then take it into your internal software and are able to manipulate and search and get the data and get alerts out that way. Part of what also is missing with an SBOM is context. And that must also be delivered by your local HDO. So an example is you may have an SBOM that looks remarkably similar, but it may be on a non-connected, publicly facing blood pressure kiosk, or it could be an SBOM for a monitoring system in neonatal ICU. If part of your risk factors include what the potential is for patient harm, that context is significant as you go forward. The other thing that really not is addressed with this is how do you maintain these over time? How do you keep them current? And the automation that you need to be able to do to intake these in some sort of machine readable format and start using some logic, some alerts to be able to help drive down your risk management. So I'll take it, I'll look at it, and it's useful in its current form, and it's even useful in an Excel spreadsheet in certain ways, but that still doesn't solve all the rest of your cybersecurity problems, that you have to have that base in place to really be able to make sure that you're able to maximize the use of the SBOM.
Right, and I beg your pardon for rolling my eyes when you mentioned managing this by spreadsheets. We have enough of that. Ken, do you have perspectives on the limitations as well?
Yeah, I mean, one of the other challenges that you have in communicating information between manufacturer and consumer and hospital is device configuration. So, for example, WannaCry, when it hit, and it did hit some hospital equipment, was written to attack a vulnerability that was in Windows for their SMB protocol for file sharing. If a device has that protocol turned off and the services turned off and hardened, it won't be affected by that particular vulnerability. But there, SBOM will tell you whether you have a particular software in it. It doesn't necessarily report the hardening configuration and all the other kinds of things that you may have done. So I don't know whether there's a project in the future to talk about nomenclature for configuration to do that, or whether it's just going to require communication then when a vulnerability happens, that the context of the device hardening needs to be communicated at that time back and forth, because it may not be possible to think of everything that you need to communicate that could handle any particular vulnerability that might come out in the future. So those are I think some of the other additional challenges of the richness of information you need to really understand what the risk is.
Yeah. It seems like a simple concept up front, but when you start drilling down into a lot of those issues, it becomes very complex very quickly. So
even a standard nomenclature, so that Win 10 versus Windows 10 versus Win space 10 versus all the various ways that people in a text field could represent the same piece of software. There needs to also, in order to be able to search across the large set of SBOMs, if there's not some common nomenclature, that can also be messy.
Yeah. So in that complexity, Jennings, how should SBOMs be managed through the update process? A routine update and patch notice is issued. How do you handle that?
Well, truthfully, let me pause there for a minute. It's early days in terms of SBOM, and the question that you just raised, the one that Eric asked, there are groups working right now, standards bodies, if you will, that are trying to determine the best practices for this. And at an ideal level, if there was a new vulnerability or a patch for a vulnerability, you would want your SBOM to be updated as fast as possible. And this ties into that concept of machine readable, right? So if we think about SBOMs, they could be published vis-a-vis a PDF, or you could go to a website, and that would just stink, because you couldn't really pull them into your CMMS system or pull them into your device that you use to look for medical devices on the network and things like that. So there's different groups, and let me just actually add something here, and I'll put a link to it in the chat. And I know we're going to talk a little more about this at the end, but there's a national project. Ken mentioned it. It's under the auspices of the National Telecommunications Infrastructure Administration, or NTIA. And basically, there's groups looking at the formats for SBOMs. We have the healthcare POC. We're looking at the tooling issues, and we're looking at the transmission issues. And so all these groups are also working together, providing feedback. So the healthcare work has been informative to those. And one of the things that's coming out of this process is something, right now it's called VEX, VEX, and it's basically a companion document to an SBOM that would include information about the status of the vulnerabilities that are possibly there in an SBOM, right? So VEX will basically be an opportunity for the manufacturer to publish this companion document and basically say, all right, so we do have OpenSSL in our product, but you don't have to worry about it. Here are the reasons why, or you do have to worry about it. Here's recommended mitigations, other context information. So it's moving very rapidly. And in the next phase of our proof of concept, we're actually going to be working on this, and Vex will include information about the availability of a patch.
Mhm.
So that's really going to, I think, help operationalize this. Again, this is early days. And, one thing I do want to mention too, NYP, we've had a lot of success ingesting and managing SBOMs through like our Splunk instance, pulling them in, getting data from the National Vulnerability Database, and then using them for different use cases. We're also bringing in ecosystem partners, so is Mayo Clinic and others that are participating in this. The other thing that we've done, we actually built a platform that we're going to open source to the world around managing SBOMs. We just finally gave a kind of public overview of it at a kind of event that's associated with this work we're doing with NTIA. And probably sometime in the next month or so, we'll be finalizing our strategy around open sourcing it. But basically what it does is it allows any organization to pull the code from wherever we put it, and they can basically run this app that allows for the organization to get an SBOM, let's say in CSV format, and basically upload it, and Python libraries will then basically standardize it and convert between different SBOM formats. And it also has the ability to pull in data from NVD and give you a score. What are you looking at here? And what are the vulnerabilities that are the highest risk? So we're very excited about building this platform and look forward to sharing that with people. It's been a great effort, this collaboration across different industries and including within the healthcare POC.
Yeah, it sounds analogous to the way that threat feeds are managed and ingested by organizations. So that's great. We'll talk about that near the end as well. So Kevin, we're having some technical difficulties with your audio feed, and I know you know about that. Don't know that we can rectify it, but we've seen your chat messages about it, and we're doing what we can. So along those same lines, Kevin, do you have any thoughts about the patch and update process yourself?
Well, Jennings was heading down the right direction. Somehow you need to develop an ecosystem around this. There are repositories and the ability to automatically send out updates when needed or be able to pull them. Without that, you're going to have thousands of vendors and 4,000 or 5,000 different types of products that you'll get. The magnitude of that, just having to go out, search for each one, pull it down. If there's a different format, it just is not going to work without 100 people to be able to do this, and you're still going to miss some things. So where Jennings was going to be able to have some open source software to be able to pull this down, be able to get standards, as Ken was talking, all of those things are to be able to do more than just sort of a, which way is the wind blowing and do I care about something a whole heck of a lot? All those are going to have to be in place as we go forward.
Right. So let's drill down into that a little more, Kevin. Institutions are absolutely overwhelmed with the amount of data that they have to ingest. And, SEAMs and the other technologies are very complex to try to ingest that and make sense of it. Where do we start with SBOMs to get the value out of the content in them and then use that to effectively decrease the risk?
So there are some sort of poor man's non-technical things you can do right off the bat, even if you get that software, that SBOM in a PDF. And this is a little dirty. You're using a little fuzzy math and some, a couple of fuzzy calculations along the way. So a couple of the things you can take a look at is, even if you just go and you look at what some of the most common softwares are that have been compromised over the last several years. And so we're talking things like Windows Office, Apache, SharePoint, Adobe. And even if you just look at that that list and bump it up against your SBOM, you're going to start to get some idea of how much do I care about this, and how.
Mhm.
And if you're able to add a little bit of context in about the Joint Commission scores on devices of where it's used, what's the impact if the device fails, and the combination of the two, while nowhere near perfect, and you can't quantify with an equation, will give you an idea of at least how you can start using it, to give you an idea of what some of your most risky devices are. You can also fit into that equation too of how many do I have.
Mhm.
So fusion pumps, if you have 5,000 of them and they have 3 or 4 of the softwares on that top 25 list of softwares that have been compromised in the past, and they're used in a high risk clinical context, well, now you know that you're going to want to take a look at that versus something which may be a lab instrument doing strep tests somewhere. And again, it's not an exact science, but quite frankly, you're still going to get something that's higher risk using some fuzzy logic like that.
Right. Anything to add to that, Ken?
Let me get off mute. The only observation I also make is my recognition that, particularly in large hospital systems, deploying an update throughout the system is a long process. Some devices get patched only when they are returned for a maintenance cycle within the system. So it is very possible that within the system, there's going to be multiple versions of software simultaneously. So, getting to Kevin's comment earlier about understanding the asset management and recognizing that you may need to have multiple SBOM versions in an analytical system reflecting the various patch states of the devices in the system.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal effort on the IT side of the house. So to do it on the operational side, that comes back to trying to change the engines on a plane while it's in flight. So, and I've got one more question on this, and then we're going to flip to the user questions, and Brad Rajetsky from H-ISAC will be coming into that. So Kevin, let's discuss a risk-based approach to using SBOM, and that way we can prioritize and focus on the devices that are most likely to be compromised, or the ones that cause the most harm, and the other factors that go into the well-being of the patients. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, this is one of where context is everything. And so to be able to really look at risk with the SBOM, you have to be able to determine again if the device is in an area that has a potential for harm. You're also going to want to look at things like if it has external access to it, again, start pushing that up as far as risk. One of the other problems, and Ken pointed this out well, is that you need to be able to take a look and see what current mitigations or remediations that you may have in place on many of these devices, or even within your network as well.
Mm-hmm.
All of those contexts, and then to be able, sorry, I lost my train of thought for a moment there, but to be able, you need to be able to take the context of it, the clinical context, the technical context, what you have for mitigations. The other thing to be able to get the risk out of there too is that you should be able to have within your institution a spreadsheet again. Okay, I've got these softwares in my SBOM, and I know what commonly is some of the most common vulnerabilities and some of the most common ways that these are compromised. And then across the top of your spreadsheet, you're going to have your list of mitigations and remediations as well. So that makes it, again, another one of those, even if I only have a point in time, but I see that I have, running Windows 7, okay, what is my institutional norm for mitigating or remediating Windows 7 if I can't get an update to it?
Great. Jennings, we're having a little more trouble with Kevin's audio. Can you hop in here and provide your insight on this?
Well, I think, yeah, let's take it from the perspective of New York Presbyterian Hospital and the fact that we have, let's say close to 80,000 medical devices on our network.
Mhm.
And we have, gosh, I forget how many vendors, but like we have an IT PMO, and there's probably about 500 to 600 medical device contracts that go through every year. There's simply no way that we could build a team that could look at every single device, every single SBOM. So just a few comments about how I think this needs to play out. I mean, one, going back to the concept of machine readable and repositories, it is really important that this machine readable component is really realized as we develop SBOM as a thing, because we need to pull it into repositories where we can search for vulnerable items, right? So if you think about, the items that are in an SBOM as configuration items, so the fact that Apache is present in the software, that would be something you could search upon, because Apache is a web server, and there's risks associated with that. Now, but to facilitate the risk management, this is again where VEX comes in, and VEX is going to basically be that companion statement where the manufacturer has the ability to say, this component isn't vulnerable because of these reasons, right? And and that's something that should hopefully take some of the heavy lifting off of the consumer of the VEX statement, as well as the SBOM, the hospital, so to speak, or whatever the delivery organization is. So I think the whole concept and the work that we're doing is lending itself to a prioritized approach. And, I just think about it from the perspective of issues that we've addressed. Apache, Windows, they're going to be the things that you're most, concerned about. But VEX also will, like I said, have a statement from the manufacturer saying, look, Apache's present, but it's not enabled in this device. Those are the kind of statements that should help. Although you do have a question about your tolerance of the statements from the vendor, and do you really want to trust that? That's another thing that you'll have to work through.
Sure. So we've come to the time where we've got 4 Q&A questions, and I want to, as we do this, turn this over to Brad Rajetsky. And Brad, thanks for coming on. You're going to ask a couple of questions, and I really want to thank you and H-ISAC making this session possible. We're really looking forward to the feedback so that we can really participate with what we'll talk about after the Q&A about how to really move the industry forward and how people can get involved in this initiative of the proof of concept and moving forward and advancing our industry overall. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Brad, and thanks for doing this.
You're welcome, Caston. Thank you, sir. Well, we have a lot of questions today and a little bit of time to answer them, but we have a couple in the Q&A section and a couple in the chat. So I'm going to first start with the Q&A section first, though. The first one is, I guess, for the all attendees here. Basically, can you walk us through an SBOM document and give us real-world examples?
Unfortunately, I actually can't, because all the SBOMs I have are proprietary. We have an NDA that's used for this effort. And, one of the things that we have to figure out is going to be how are SBOMs published in terms of their public availability. There's real sensitivity in the part of a manufacturer. We do not want to, publicly shame them, but they also want to get this information to their customers. And that's some of the things that we're working through, but the information is all proprietary that we're using for the proof of concept at this time. I don't know, maybe Ken, if you have something you want to add to that.
Well, I'm just, the question would be, is on the NTAI software transparency website, are there some examples?
If there are examples, yeah, we could share. Yeah.
That would be a place to go. The link was in the chat, but I think if you go in there, there's lots of information, report outs from the various different groups, and I'm sure you'd be able to find examples there.
Well, sounds good. So yeah, definitely refer back to that documentation in the chat there. I have a next one. It's kind of a long scenario, but I was hoping if you guys could answer it here. Regarding VEX, if a SW vendor publishes a VEX that claims there is no risk from a CVE of any kind there in the Trust Me software, and later turns out the vulnerability is present and a hacker compromises the consumer environment via that previously referenced vulnerability, will the SW vendor be liable for the recovery costs because of what they reported?
Well, that's a good question. I think that's actually one of the sort of questions that have led to some of the hesitancy to embrace SBOM in the first place, right? You know, people are worried, what if this information about vulnerabilities is out there for the bad guys? And I think, you know, the bad guys already know. They have the same ability to take apart software and find out the components just like the manufacturer. So I think ultimately where this should land is there shouldn't be liability unless there's just complete carelessness in terms of how you know, the VEX statement is authored. And I would say this too, you know, we have this issue with software patching now. You know, you can hear from, you know, Microsoft that this software patch will in fact prevent a vulnerability from being exploited. And then they have to follow up with another patch because the first one actually may not have solved the problem. So I think issues around vulnerabilities and manufacturer statements, you know, I think people can miss the forest for the trees, so to speak. And I don't think liability is really going to be an issue long-term with this. I think it'll be normal, just kind of like software patching and statements around vulnerabilities in other contexts.
I would add into that, certainly in some of the various contract languages that we've been seeing from hospitals, the topic of liability is often central to the negotiations and discussions. I don't think specific to VEX statements that the thing that has come in, but certainly the industry wrestles with how to deal with those kinds of issues. The Healthcare Sector Coordinating Council does have a work group that is working on standardized contract language that may help level and help the industry normalize those kinds of discussions.
And the idea that your SBOM is going to give away all of your secrets to some other business, some other country, when you're dealing with potentially even nation states who they'll just buy one of these things and they'll reverse engineer it. They don't need your SBOM.
Well,
that said, I do want to say that I'm completely mesmerized by Kevin's lava lamp.
I used to have two, one broke.
I like it all. Well, those are all some great answers. I see that we have another question come in as well. Again, you can use that Q&A at the bottom. I can always answer these questions. On to the next one though. What would you say is the economic value to the device manufacturers to develop and deliver SBOMs?
I'll be happy to jump in first on that one. I think the main economic value is getting your device approved to get on the market. The FDA is going to be mandating this expectation. It's coming. If you're a device manufacturer and you don't incorporate those barriers to getting your device on the market, then you're not doing proper overall business risk management.
I can't prove this at all, but I would venture an opinion that if a company can produce a good, clean, easily produce a good, clean SBOM, that also chances for that they have a good, rigorous development process and a good software management process in place. It should help them economically. As a customer, when I would look at these things, if they couldn't produce an SBOM, it always in the back of my head made me a little worried about how they were managing their software and doing their development.
Just like the fundamentals of having good asset management, I have always viewed the FDA's interest as a regulatory approval element is you're demonstrating that you are going to be able to maintain the device in the post-market process because you know what's in it. And if you can't tell the regulator that you know what's in your device, then it might create regulatory worries that there's going to be risks that will come about later because you will be you're driving blind.
Sounds good. Sounds good. All right, Caston, we have time for another question, you think? We're gonna keep
Yeah,
going?
let's go. Let's keep it
All
going.
right, we got 2 more to go, 2 more to go. Here we go, or more come. Is there an independent third-party regulatory body that verifies the accuracy of the SBOMs a vendor is providing?
No, there isn't. And I think, there's not an independent regulation, or I'm sorry, independent body that's looking at, software patches and are they actually patching the vulnerabilities for what are claimed. I mean, I think the whole idea is that this can be a little bit of a market-based solution, but also, there's been proposed legislation around SBOM and, including in that accuracy of SBOMs. It's certainly something that's in the preliminary guidance from the FDA. And, I'm expecting there to be regulation coming out, possibly something relatively soon that's going to use SBOMs as part of overall security, as a national security issue. And I would wager that accuracy of SBOMs will be probably something mentioned in that as well.
And I'll just add that I can't think of any greater disaster than a vendor supplying misleading or insufficient information, because that word would spread across the industry quickly. So Brad, thank you for your time today, and thanks to H-ISAC and the entire team there that's made this possible. We really, really appreciate it, and look forward to doing these again in the future as well.
All right, thank you so much.
Sure thing.
Bye.
So Jennings, this is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. There's been so much activity, and the three of you have been phenomenal with a number of other people contributing to the development of SBOMs and where we are today. But now it's time to move to that next level, and you've got some ideas that you'd like to share, and I'm sure that Ken and Kevin will want to contribute to this, but it really comes down to how as an industry do we bridge and collaborate more to bring the manufacturers and the healthcare providers to the table in order to really advance this and make this achieve the full potential that it can be?
Well, I think first and foremost, I'd really strongly recommend that if people are interested, they want to roll up their sleeves, help with the development of SBOMs as a concept for medical devices and the healthcare industry, contact me. I'll put my email address in the chat, and join the SBOM effort that's under NTIA. We are getting ready to enter into a third phase where we are, again, looking at things like VEX, working with the other standards work groups, if you will. And we're always looking for HDOs and MDMs to, basically sign up. And one of the processes we have for healthcare delivery organizations is to get a device inventory, run it by some of the MDM participants, and see if they have some that they could produce an SBOM, and get your feet wet with this. The other thing is there's going to be other opportunities for public participation in conversations about this. Like I said, I think there's a strong chance there's going to be some form of legislative activity coming up, and there's a chance for people to have a voice there. And I just recommend that if you want to learn more, like I said, contact me. We can pull you into this NTIA-led effort, which is a great effort. And I'll tell you, at our last meeting, we had participants from Japan, Europe, multiple countries in Europe. It really has taken off. We're advising the automotive sector, the energy sector, and SBOM is not something in the future. It's now, it's real. It's just a question of building. And think of this like, the first version of HTML. You wouldn't want to use it now, but it's really good that we created it and that it was being used, and it led to where we are today. So it's really important that people just start adopting SBOMs, both on the manufacturer and the HDO side. And really pushing for this because it's real, it's not going away, and it's going to be in multiple industries before you know it.
Fantastic. Anything to add, Kevin, Ken?
I would just reinforce that it's only through use that you learn, and there are so many different variations that we're going to be running into that participating in those kinds of uses will help us find where the gaps are and continue to improve. So strong encouragement.
And to really continue the progress on this, as HDOs really need to be assertive about requesting these, because the more you can get the draw from the customers, the more this is going to start becoming mainstream.
Absolutely. And I'd like to add to your comment, Jennings. In participating in this, you're really engaging with the community and getting to know the inside baseball of who's doing what, which vendors on the software, the CMDB or the medical device security vendors are really attaching themselves and leading this forward. And that can lead to better decisions just through the knowledge of what's happening with the industry and what the solutions are doing. So, it is that two-way street. When you're involved with an industry consortium like this, there is the advantage of raising all the ships in the harbor, but you're the one at the bow when you're participating and actively engaged to stand there and be the leader in the implementation, not just in the design of the overall industry system. So that's my 2 cents worth. We do have about 15 minutes. We're running ahead of time, and we've got a couple more questions. Brad, would you like to come back on and handle the additional questions that we have since we have a little time?
Sure, of course. Let me get these all sorted out here because I'm going to read off these. The first one I have here is there a tool where SBOM could be generated in comparison form to the previously generated SBOM when the software goes through the minor or major upgrades with their libraries? It seems redundant to keep generating the same SBOM files over and over again.
Well, I wouldn't say that the goal is to generate redundant SBOMs. I mean, first of all, these ultimately will always be in machine readable format. And we're just talking about updating values, in some sort of repository. And there are tools that can basically be used as part, like integrated with Jenkins, like dependency track, which I just sent, that can basically help manufacturers keep the SBOM accurate and publish it. I mean, we're not talking about human beings crafting these like, a wooden statue. They're meant to be something that machines are creating for other machines to consume. And then to have, processes to leverage this as part of your risk management, et cetera, et cetera. And tools are starting to flood the market. I put the link to dependency track. You should take a look at it. That's one just good example of the tooling that will make this not such a heavy lift for folks.
And until we get to a point of where, or we will have to get to a point of where somebody just pushes a button and this thing sort of squirts out the other end. And then it really, if all of that, as Jennings was saying, if all of that is there and in place, it doesn't matter whether you're totally regenerating the SBOM or just doing partial.
So, and it somewhat depends on what your build process is and how you get to the SBOM. Again, it should be automated. It's going to be an onerous task if there's a lot of manual effort done every time you turn a update for your software. So whether or not it's delivered in a diff form versus delivered in a complete set, that can be a discussion amongst the standards people about how effective that is. But if you deliver in a diff form, then you have to have some ability to get the first one in. So it's probably simpler just to produce the whole thing.
And questions like this are actively being looked at as part of that NTIA effort. We have people from the Linux Foundation, DHS, Carnegie Mellon, software companies that make software for doing component analysis. So this is something that is a solvable problem. It may be in that HTML 1.0 format, if you will, but it's coming, in terms of getting to HTML5.
Well, that's good. That's good. All right, well, I have another question right here. Do SBOM requirements and recommendations distinguish between typical medical devices being maintained and managed by HDOs and MDMs, or like basically BYOD solutions? For example, here, mobile devices used in clinics, potentially on clinic-provided networks, but that are not owned or managed by the HDO admins themselves. Also, patients who can interface with these medical devices use the MDM apps on their own devices. So this is more of a BYOD solutions there in regards to basically SBOM requirements.
Well, at this time, none of the standards really look into the ultimate context of the device and where it's being used in a BYOD sense. Now, going back to VEX, the assumption with VEX is that it's on the clinical network, and the manufacturer should have information about how the device is deployed, whether or not it's internet facing, restricted to communications with, say, with a PACS, you know, and that VEX document is meant to actually then use that context about a typical deployment for the VEX statement about the vulnerability and whether or not it can be exploited. That doesn't mean, though, that the HDO can't itself, you know, question that context and say, well, we've got a, you know, an atypical deployment, so that's still there. But as far as BYOD, we haven't had any real discussions about, you know, anything involving a consumer's device or anything at this time.
And the medical device manufacturers, if they're maintaining it, I think that, and maybe Jennings, you might have seen it, or Ken, but I haven't, of what kind of infrastructure, ecosystem, notification process that you have if the vendor's going to come in at 3 a.m. and update your software. How do you get that new SBOM to somebody? How do you let them know what's going on? How do you then potentially have to take some more mitigations? I have not seen that anywhere, but it certainly is a need.
Yeah, one
So
of the things, oh, go ahead, Ken, I'm sorry.
Well, I would structure the problem as there's SBOM as an initiative, which is multidisciplinary. It's useful in terms of describing software content. There is the SBOMs that will be expected contractually by a hospital because you're placing a device in their network, whether you're maintaining it or whether they're maintaining it, it exposes risk on the network because of potential vulnerabilities. And then there is SBOMs for regulatory approval. And so if a BOD medical device app with a patient's device, and that's considered a medical accessory of some sort, then the SBOM answer is going to be because the regulators are going to be expecting that because you're getting it approved as a medical device. If it's truly a non-medical device application that doesn't touch hospital networks, then neither a regulator nor a customer is necessarily demanding it. It still might be a useful thing for you to manage your own as a device manufacturer of managing vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I just want to add too, you know, these sort of operational issues are things that we're looking into and building through iteration. The original, if you go to the link to the NTIA project, you can see a white paper that was authored about phase 1 of the POC. And one thing that we stressed is what we're doing is not specific to healthcare. And I want to explain that for a minute. But, you know, the idea that vendors manage things for an organization, and there's this issue of, all right, how do we, you know, manage that so we don't take out operations? That's not a healthcare specific problem. So as we think about this in the context of the POC, you know, we've had simple versions of use cases like biomedical operations and support. They get more and more granular each time. And we try to also think about it in the context of other organizations. So you're seeing playbooks being written that people can take advantage. We wrote one about how to pull an SBOM in the current formatting into a SIM product. And that can be used by any organization to help manage this. So we're getting deeper and deeper into these use cases, and we'll be able to basically, at some point, have better answers to some of these questions.
Well, great. All right. Well, the next question I have here is where does state machine diagrams fit in? So basically, where does it fit in with the SBOM community?
I view that more as, if you look at the draft pre-market guidance version 1, that it's part of the information that you may provide to the regulators to show comprehensive understanding of the security architecture. So I don't think state diagrams fit into the SBOM itself because it's part of how the device is designed rather than it being part of software content per se. It's more software function.
Okay. Well, the last question I have here in the Q&A portion right here at this point, at this time, is which SBOM formats are preferred by hospitals and software consumers? Or which ones are, at least a personal taste for you guys, which ones are preferred?
I think one thing we've tried to do as part of the POC is to avoid having a preferred flavor. We are working with Cyclone DX, SWID, SPDX, looking at translating across the different formats. We don't want the POC to be a place where the favored format plays out. And truthfully, I don't think there's going to be a favored format. You might have vendors that have one, or you maybe have a customer, but the tooling should help with translation across and keeping fidelity. And that's something we're actively looking at as part of the POC. So for like the tool that we built, we can translate between SWID and SPDX, and we're looking at Cyclone DX as part of the next phase of it. So I think we have to accept that there's not going to be a single preferred format, and probably regulations that come out will leave it to the market to let that play out.
Okay.
So Brad, thanks again. We've got one more question, and we're coming up to the end of our time, and we want to be respectful of that. What we'll be doing is we'll follow up to the question and answer in the show notes that we'll provide. So again, we have recorded the session, and we'll be putting a link up to that. That's going to take a couple of days. So you can look for one email from me or one LinkedIn message from me, and that will be the extent. We're not putting you on a mailing list. So if you do want to opt in, or if you've got any questions, if you want to contact any of the people here or other people that I've become aware of, if you do have any questions or concerns, I can direct it to the panelists who've been here, or possibly Michelle Jump, who heads up that NTIA committee. We'll get you the answer. That's my commitment, or we'll tell you that there is no answer. How's that? So Brad, thank you and H-ISAC for making this all possible. Your team has been great in working together. It's been a real pleasure. Kevin, Jennings, Ken, fantastic conversation. Look forward to doing these. If there's anything that I can do, please, don't hesitate to call. And for everyone who's attended, thank you for your time today. Thank you. Hopefully it's been useful. We welcome your feedback. You can email me directly with that feedback, because we want to make this more and more useful to you. Any last thoughts, any last words before saying goodbye, gentlemen?
SBOM is here.
Jump right in.
Indeed.
You need that on your license plate or your bumper, Jennings. So thank you all for attending. We'll be putting the notes together and providing a forum, and H-ISAC is going to be a great reference point in helping moving this forward. So contact Jennings, contact me if you've got questions or you want to participate in the initiative that Jennings and the NTIA is pushing along with VEX and the open source projects. There's a lot of action going on. I'm really excited to play this small part in hosting today. So thank you for in participating with me, and we look forward to next time. Until then, have a great time. Bye.